Hi, I'm Anna Spencer. Today we're going to talk about prosecuting people for international crimes, war crimes in particular. I think this is such an important issue, and I have some big hopes that we're going to be able to do something to somebody that most of us can't stand. I'm very interested in our two guests, the two Davids. David Matus is a human rights lawyer in Winnipeg, and a month or two ago he published an article in the Globe and Mail arguing that Canada could take the lead in prosecuting Vladimir Putin for war crimes. Isn't that a delightful thought? David Harries is in Kingston, Ontario. He is a former military officer and a former chair of the Canadian Hogwash Group, and he's a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science. His main claim to fame, I think, is that he's the rugby coach for the Canadian Military College. But I'm not going to spend much time on rugby today because we're going to talk about prosecuting war criminals. Hello, David Matus. I got a great deal of enjoyment out of reading your article in the Globe and Mail, and I think that's where we want to start. It ties in with a conversation that David Harries and I had been holding about accountability and the fact that, many of our problems these days are caused by the fact that we have insufficient ways of holding public officials accountable for their misdeeds. And that certainly is the case when it comes to the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So, David Matus, will you please give me or give all of us your view of what might be done about this?
That the article that I did publish in the Globe and Mail did have a co-author, Maria Reisdorf, who's another international human rights lawyer.
Thank you. All right. Fine. Now tell us what you propose.
I propose that Canada, first of all, sign on to the component of the International Criminal Court statute that allows for prosecution of the crime of aggression. I propose, second, that Canada enact the necessary implementing legislation. And I propose, third, that Canada issue an arrest warrant for Putin.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and why do you think that might work? If it's so easy to do, why hasn't somebody already done it? The ICJ did have a meeting, and they did issue an order, I think it was, to Russia to stop it. And to go home, if I believe. Anyway, they said they need time to study the matter. And until they do, then Russia should stop its military action. Of course, that had absolutely no impact on Putin or on anybody Russian, I gather. But I'm not sure how that referral took place. Who asked the ICJ to even take up the question, and where does it stand now?
Well, first of all, one has to distinguish between the ICJ and the ICC. The International Court of Justice is an interstate complaints mechanism, and the lawsuits are filed by states and they're filed against states. The International Criminal Court is a criminal prosecution mechanism, and it prosecutes individuals, not states. In theory, the prosecutor can prosecute on their own initiative. It doesn't require a state request. The advantage of a state request is it speeds up the prosecution because the prosecutor, as long as there's jurisdiction, would have to conduct a preliminary examination. And if there's enough evidence from the preliminary examination, the prosecutor asks the court for authorization to conduct an investigation. And once states refer, that preliminary step, or the initial step of a preliminary examination can be skipped, and the prosecutor can go straight to an investigation. And that's what's happened. The prosecutor has gone straight to an investigation, and that's where it stands.
Now, hold on. Wait a minute. I'm confused because now I'm trying to keep in my own head the distinction clear between the ICC and the ICJ, which is what we usually call the World Court. Now, it's the World Court that issued this order for Russia to stop. Is that a prosecutor? Are you talking about that action now? And does the ICJ have a prosecutor that can take the initiative, or is it the ICC that has already begun work on charging Putin personally with war crimes?
Well, it's just the ICC. As I say, the ICJ doesn't prosecute. It just resolves doesn't prosecute individuals. It just resolves disputes between states. Now, and the referral is dealing only with crimes against humanity, not with aggression. And arguably, Putin is responsible for crimes against humanity under the doctrine of command responsibility, but crimes against humanity can be committed by soldiers in the field. And in fact, the commander may or may not be responsible. It depends what the commander knew, what the commander told, what the commander did to prevent, and so on. Because there's no charge yet, just an investigation, and it's presumably there will be charges, but of course, the Ukrainian system itself is prosecuting or planning to prosecute these people, and the court functions on the basis of complementarity, meaning if the local jurisdiction can do it, the international court will not feel it necessary. There's so many of these crimes that it's kind of overwhelming, especially in the midst of an invasion, for the Ukrainian system to deal with all these crimes and all these prosecutions. So I can see the court getting involved, but it's unclear who they will prosecute. I mean, they've got lots of frontline soldiers against whom there's very compelling evidence. I mean, the Ukrainians have captured a number of them who committed these crimes and even made statements about them. But whether they will go to the next step up the chain of command remains to be seen. Quite, in my view, they should and they could. There's also, of course, with any court, a jurisdictional issue, and Russia's not a party to the Rome Treaty, the court treaty. The court.
Sorry, Russia's not a party to what?
The International Criminal Court.
It's not.
It's not a,
oh.
So that raises jurisdictional issues. Ukraine is. And the way the court treaty works, the court treaty works is that the crime has to be committed by a national state party or on the territory of a state party, and because Ukraine is Ukraine didn't actually join the court. What they did is they filed a declaration saying they didn't sign on to everything in the court jurisdiction. They just signed a declaration saying, as from a certain date before the Russian invasion, the court has jurisdiction for crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine. So
I'm sorry. Did they sign that after the aggression had taken place, or making it retroactive, or does that matter?
Well, they signed it before the aggression, the invasion.
Okay.
It was prompted, I believe, by the Crimean invasion, and so it was in place by the time of the Russian invasion. And they're saying that declaration applies to this invasion, which it probably does. I mean, the court must think it does because they are, or the prosecutor must think it does because they are investigating. But it doesn't apply to it applies only to crimes against humanity. It doesn't apply to aggression.
Why?
Well, because there's a separate treaty that has to be signed for aggression, and Ukraine hasn't signed it. Canada hasn't signed it. There are some states that have signed it, but not relevant.
Oh, I see. Well, okay. Now, my understanding was all messed up. I assumed that they had a bunch of laws outlawing various kinds of war crimes, and a few years ago they added aggression to the list, and that everybody who had already signed on to any of them was automatically covered by this new law against aggression. But that's not how it happened. You have a separate treaty forbidding aggression?
Well, they did add aggression to the list, but you need to sign on to that addition separately.
I see. Okay.
And
neither Ukraine nor Canada nor Russia nor a lot of other countries have
there are countries that have signed on, but not that many, and certainly not Canada or Ukraine.
So to make it possible to charge Putin with aggression and not just other war crimes, which are bad deeds, but you might not be, I'm assuming you're saying we might not be able to convict him of war crimes, but for sure somebody is responsible for the aggression, and it must have been Putin, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, when it comes to accusing Putin personally of crimes against humanity, his defense would probably be, well, I mean, these soldiers did this on their own. I didn't order it. I didn't know about it. I disapprove of it. I mean, that's one line of defense that's open to him. But if he's prosecuted for aggression, it's a lot harder. Is he to say anything like that? Because I mean, the aggression comes from the leadership. It doesn't come from the soldiers on the ground.
Got it. Okay. So now to make this happen, Canada and Ukraine both have to hurry up and sign that protocol or whatever. Is that right?
It doesn't have to be. Ukraine doesn't have to sign it. It's enough if Canada does.
I see. Okay.
Because Canada, I mean, because there are Canadians that have been harmed by the invasion, which would give Canada jurisdiction. It would be people, Canadians who were in Ukraine at the time of the invasion, and Canadians who've been there, have gone there since. I mean, there's a number of them.
So now it's just a matter of our pushing the Canadian government to want to do such a thing. Is that right? And they haven't shown any initiative indicating that they are keen to do it. Is that right?
I think that's true. Although I wouldn't minimize the difficulty in getting Canada to do this, because as I say, there's a tendency for Canada, particularly, to function multilaterally, and Canada was happy to do that, to join in the referral to the International Criminal Court about crimes against humanity, because there's a lot of other countries doing it, the like-minded, and my guess is if I haven't actually talked to anybody in the government of Canada about this, but my guess is they would say they'd be reluctant to do it alone, and they'd like to do it with the like-minded, and it would just sort of spill or spiral into some sort of multilateral negotiation, which could take a long time.
Okay, but it'd be better if Canada would just step up and do it quickly, right? And there's no likelihood that Canada would be willing to by itself take the initiative.
I would say that generally my attitude towards Canadian foreign policy is there's a tendency to over multilateralize
I see.
and not do as much as they could do independently. I see this in a number of different ways because I'm dealing with international human rights a lot, and I think this is an instance of that. I mean, I don't see why Canada couldn't do this on its own. I think it's worthwhile trying to see if there's others. And my guess is if they actually made an effort to find some others, they could probably find some others. I don't know if they get all of the states that signed on to the referral on crimes against humanity.
But now you say there are a bunch of states that are already organizing something. Now, what is this other thing that they're already trying to do? That's about crimes against humanity and not aggression, right?
Right. Yeah, they're trying to get the court to prosecute for whoever's guilty for crimes against humanity. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But this would be something bigger. It sounds more promising to me. Like I would like to get the guy on aggression, and him particularly. Yeah. I think that's the problem. This one man has enormous control over the whole country. There is nobody in Russia who seems to be able or even conceive of hoping to stop him. If whatever he wants to do, if he wanted to use a nuclear weapon on Toronto tomorrow, nobody's going to say boo in Russia. They'll go along with it. I've talked to enough people to be pretty confident that they just do not have any backbone when it comes to trying to even attempt to stop their dictator. Sorry for my strong language, but I think we ought to try to. And by the way, how have you had any contact with Chrystia Freeland? Because if anybody in the government is, pretty hot under the collar about the Ukraine situation, it would be she. And I would think you could ask her, how about it? Can you push Justin?
Yeah, there's one other thing I should point out, which is, the International Criminal Court can prosecute for crimes against humanity for crimes committed on the territory of a state party, which is why they're looking at crimes against humanity in Ukraine, because and the court and Ukraine has accepted the jurisdiction. They can't do that for aggression. It has to be a national of a state party, and so Canada can prosecute under universal jurisdiction, but for aggression, but the court could not. So that's why it's important that Canada or other states do something about this. Now, you asked me, have I talked to Freeland? And no, I haven't. My general attitude was to try to engage Ukrainian, Canadian organizations, NGOs involved in this, and I've because I think that would be a more compelling request if they did so than if I did so as an individual. And so far that hasn't happened, but I'm continuing to try to reach out to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now if he were prosecuted, I hate to be still confused about this, but you say the ICJ cannot take the initiative on that, and but the ICC could, or if Canada were to try to do it to bring him to justice for aggression, would this be through the ICC or the ICJ?
Neither. First of all, the ICJ, as I point out, doesn't prosecute. All it does is it's like a contract disputes organization. It deals with disputes between states, but it doesn't prosecute individuals. The International Criminal Court can prosecute Russians for crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine, but it can't because Ukraine has signed on to a declaration giving it the court authority to do so. The ICC cannot prosecute a Russian for aggression because the court statute, the crime of aggression, the jurisdiction is limited to nationals of states parties, and Russia's not a state party. So Canada can prosecute, but not through the ICJ, through the International Criminal Court. And the ICJ, as I point out, doesn't prosecute. All it does is it's like a contract disputes organization. It deals with disputes between states, but not prosecute individuals. The not through the ICC, but only on its own initiative, which it legally has the authority to do, both nationally and at international law.
I see. Okay, now there's where I was confused. So it would be actually tried in a Canadian court.
Exactly.
Huh. Oh, that's
Well,
fun.
if he's arrested, there was something like this that happened with Pinochet. The Spanish court, who was a former dictator of Chile, the Spanish court wanted to prosecute Pinochet under universal jurisdiction because its nationals had been harmed by Pinochet, set out an arrest warrant. He showed up in England, and the Spanish started extradition requests with England to get Pinochet to Spain so he could be tried. Eventually, the UK court said he was sick and he could go home. But I mean, that's the sort of thing that could happen. Is if Canada signed on to the court treaty about aggression, enacted the legislation on aggression with universal jurisdiction, which it now has for war crimes, crimes against humanity, put out an arrest warrant on the basis that there was Canadians harmed, then Putin couldn't go anywhere that has an extradition treaty with Canada, because then extradition treaty would require that state to send him to Canada. And if he did go somewhere, he would, like Pinochet, be arrested, and unlike Pinochet, actually be sent to the extraditing country for trial, which would be Canada. So that would be the mechanism.
What a lovely thought, except it's very unlikely. Listen, I've been hogging the microphone here, and David Harris, no doubt, has thoughts or questions about this. And then I want to propose a more radical notion of my own. But David, why don't you join in?
David, thank you for what you've clarified in my mind as well. I'm embedded these days in this. I'm trying to do an analysis on accountability globally, and particularly in geopolitics. And I'm about, I think, 70% into having an article that I will send to you folks. An article, a think piece. I'm trying to resolve the obstacles. For instance, David, you mentioned over multilateralization, however you say that. I relate that in my accountability analysis to the idea of consensus. We don't have accountability in places there's consensus because everybody's got immunity from making a decision. And that hurts collective effort.
Well, hold on. What do you mean everybody's got immunity? What do you mean by that?
If a decision can only be made on consensus, everybody's got to concede to the decision. But if one person doesn't like it, then there's no decision.
Right.
So everybody can have a very, very strong opinion knowing that one of their fellow actors is not going to agree. So nothing happens. It's an impunity guarantor, the idea of consensus. Having a lot of pairs here, like-minded is not the same as commitment-minded. There's a lot of people that agree with other people, but when somebody says, okay, let's do it, the likeness sort of dries up. The people are not ready to commit to take action for what they agree on. Crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, and war crimes. I can remember when I was the force engineer in the former Yugoslavia, we had a gazillion of all of them. I mean, we weren't into the aggression era yet, but we were certainly crimes against humanity and war crimes. And we had a few steps taken afterwards. And maybe it's interesting that our discussion today is happening today because in the newspapers, the New York Times and I'm going to say the Washington Post, but anyway, have this story on who follows Putin and whether anybody can follow Putin. And what will Putin do, if he survives this, however long the Ukraine invasion era lasts? And both those articles are discouraging because in both cases, they explain why, unless Putin literally dies of natural causes, and then there will be a huge question about the future of Russia, there's nobody around to replace him. Those that might, won't. Those that might have tried, can't. Navalny and some of these other people. So he's on pretty solid footing, unless he goes, unless he dies. Remember a few
You point
months?
upward. Honey, we want you to point downward when you talk about where he's going to go.
Okay. Fair enough. But one person's heaven is another person's hell. I mean, it's the old the old story. I've also been following, because it's an accountability issue, the thousands of cases of crimes of aggression, crimes against humanity, war crimes that have been found and recorded by, again, thousands of people, Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians, of the war. It's a huge, huge number of challenges, even to prioritize who should be indicted, arrested, charged first. And then I guess I finish in terms of the context. I go to the UN Security Council. We've all heard much about whether the United Nations these days is fit for purpose and so on. But I did a little bit of research and I found some things that I actually didn't know. One was that there's very unlikely to be a decision come out of the UN Security Council. That's because every month the chairmanship changes. And accountability is a function of leadership and vice versa. And I've got the list of the members of the Security Council here: China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, United States, obviously, the P5, and they can veto whatever they want. And now we have Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, India, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, Norway, and the United Arab Emirates. That's quite a varied group of countries who probably are not all on the same wavelength about what is right or wrong, and whether they're really worried about something that is not impacting them directly. But the fact that every month the person at the front of the room changes, I see this as one of the contextual obstacles to accountability for whether it's crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, or war crimes, as I've always called them and understood them. Canada, it might be that that's the only possible solution with all these, pairs of obstacles and pairs of differences to getting something done, that a country like Canada steps to the front. But Meta, I, like you, I'm not very optimistic about Canada stepping to the front on anything that Mr. Trudeau does not see a benefit for him and his position on, whether it's for the election, whether it's for his. Anyway, I'm not very.
Look, then let's try to convince him, which is, I think, not an impossible argument, that in fact it is to his advantage, that everybody would be cheering him. I think it's true.
Okay. Somebody has to step forward. who that is not conflicted by some of these counter opposites. Who will convince Mr. Trudeau?
Chrystia Freeland.
Wow.
If David asks her, and I will co-sign anything David wants help with.
What do you think, David? Would she? I mean, I am under the impression, ever since the convoy protest, that Chrystia Freeland is now very much on the side of Mr. Trudeau, and she will not.
Well, look, if she makes the argument, and I don't know whether she would or not, that you got some voters who are Ukrainian, and I'm their leader, and I tell you they want you to do this, so please do it, Justin. Why not? Get after her.
I don't think there's a big constituency in Canada in favor of the Russian invasion. I don't think there's many votes to be lost to opposing that invasion. And in fact, Canada has opposed it in other ways. So I'm not convinced that politics are the obstacle here. I think it's bureaucratic kind of inertia, the fact that nobody else is doing it, what David Harris called, I mean, this desire to seek consensus. I mean, there's things like that. I don't think that we're sort of tilting against popular opinion with this. It's more the weeds, the kind of objections which we don't hear about that are being voiced rather than a contrary public opinion.
Okay, well, my problem is not. I mean, I'm all in favor of doing what you can and just bringing this guy, letting the world know that we think he's a bad guy and deserves the worst thing that we could impose on him. However, I'm not happy with leaving it there. My own thinking about what to do about holding people to international law is a much more radical proposal. And both of you are going to say that I'm crazy, but I'm going to tell you what I would like to do. But I think, we are at the point now where the new world order is now the old defunct world order because, Putin has turned over the chess table and the things that never were working, hadn't been working very well for the last 40 years are not going to work at all anymore. So we have to have a whole new game plan for the United Nations and for a whole bunch of other things about international order. So I've been working on developing a few proposals for what really substantial institutional reforms need to be made, especially in the UN system, and which frankly bring it closer to being really, really a world government. The problem is we have real law and then we have international law. And that international law doesn't amount to a hill of beans because you can't enforce it. If you can't enforce something, don't tell me that it's law. So we have these rules that we say, you're not supposed to do aggression. And then he aggresses and then he can just laugh at us because he doesn't even bother to laugh. He's of no interest whatever in what has been declared to be illegal. Well, I think what we need, among 2 or 3 other institutional reforms after this war, is going to be a real renegotiation of some of the aspects of the UN Charter. And what I'd like to do is see a parliamentary assembly, only it shouldn't be an assembly that's elected. It should be an assembly that's done like a citizens' assembly by lottery or by sortition of people all over the world who would send somebody to be their delegate to the UN Assembly for a year. So you would have a whole new house or wing of the UN with authority, besides the General Assembly and besides the Security Council. And then what we could say is that the new rules would say that if, let's say, 2 or 3 of these major bodies or chairs or chambers of the UN agree to it, and that would be, let's say, either the General Assembly and the new Citizens Assembly, or the General Assembly and the World Court, ICJ, or even the Security Council, if they don't have a veto. If any 2 of these outfits agree, then we could allow people inside Russia to come secretly to them and propose authorization to oust their leader. Because if a man has become, a person rather, has become clearly a person of a war criminal, somebody that is being indicted or should be indicted for a crime of aggression, then that person should not be eligible to be the head of any government in the world. And these UN bodies, not easily, not lightly, not frivolously, but really should have the power to say this person is, until either found guilty or innocent, this person should not be allowed to be the head of a country. So if there's a group of people in Russia who want to have a coup, come and tell us about it. We will authorize you if we think you've made a good case. And then every country in the world should back up this group of people that we have authorized to replace this illegal war criminal who's the head of their country until he is put on trial and found either guilty or not guilty. How about that?
Well, when you're talking about UN reform, one has to look at UN reform that has occurred in the past. And when you were setting out your proposal, I was thinking about the change from the UN Commission on Human Rights to UN Council on Human Rights. The reason for the shift was the commission was over-politicized. It spent too much time on Israel, not enough time on the major violators. Is that there was a lot of violators who were on the commission and used it to get immunity in exchange for ganging up on Israel. And so they abolished the commission and replaced it in the council. And the council, when it got started, instead of spending a disproportionate amount of time on Israel, spent all its time about countries on Israel and Israel alone. Eventually, it spread out to other countries, and now, it presents the same problem that the old commission did: too much time on Israel and not enough on others. I think, you can change the institutions, but you can't change the planet. The problem in Russia, obviously Putin's the head of the system, but there's a lot of people who support Putin, and for vile reasons. It's a kleptocracy. It's an attempt to revive the Soviet Union. It's got imperialistic ambitions, and Putin is an old KGB person, and the old KGB is basically supporting him. The notion that you can create a global institution with wonderful ideals, and then all of a sudden those ideals are going to be realized, it doesn't really reflect the planet we're dealing with. My view is that we're much better off with incrementalism, rather than to change systems globally, deal with situations one by one. And in fact, in terms of incrementalism, Russia represents an opportunity, because although what Russia has done is popular within Russia, it's not popular more or less anywhere else. There are a few countries that like it, but very little. And as a result, there is momentum to use international institutions and standards and mechanisms in a proper way that haven't existed before. So I think we should I mean, obviously, the problem with Russia is Russia, but I think it represents an opportunity to expand incrementally the use of these instruments and standards because there's such a consensus against Russia, and I think that's the way we move the system forward rather than throw everything overboard and construct a new system.
Okay, listen, I agree with you that we ought to do what we can now, but what you want to do is not going to stop anything. I mean, all you can hope for is that someday he's going to want to leave the country and somebody could theoretically arrest him, which they won't do actually. But that's not a disincentive to him. He doesn't give a hoot. And he doesn't have to leave the country, and nobody's going to in any way interfere with what he's doing. What we have to do is think of a way. If somebody is a criminal in Canada, we send the police after him, and we stop him while he's doing the act. We keep him from continuing to burglarize or murder or whatever he's trying to do. We stop him. But we can't stop Putin. And we want to stop him before he continues, not wait until after he's finished and then maybe 15 years later, hope you can bring him to trial. We want to stop him. Now, how do you do that? Well, you would send the police, but I don't frankly want a UN police force, because if there's a police force that's actually capable of intervening in another country, they're too powerful, and I worry about that. So I don't want anybody to be strong enough to actually go and arrest him, but I want him to be arrested. What do you do? Well, you say, you Russians, you are the guys who elected him. He's your problem. You're responsible for him, and you have a duty to get rid of him, to stop him before he goes any further. So you people, you form yourselves a committee and say that you're going to be the coup plotters. You come to us and we'll authorize you to do it. And all the rest of the countries in the world will back you up every way we can, with sanctions or whatever you want to have done. We won't invade. You got to handle it, the arrest yourself, but you arrest him.
Well, when you talk about disincentivization, I think you have to think about disincentivizing not only the Russians, but others who are potentially thinking about invading. I mean, China has very aggressive ambitions towards India, towards Taiwan. What happens to Russia will send a message to China. I don't think, I mean, when you're dealing with an invasion, you're not going to stop an invasion just by legal means. You have to, I mean, Canada and the Allied won World War II, not because of Nuremberg, they won it because of armed force. I think that Canada and others are correct in sending armaments to Ukraine, and Ukraine is doing very well. But
he can wave his nuclear weapons around and say, you do another thing and we will use nuclear weapons, and they're not going to do it. In fact, I mean, Biden made it clear before the war started that he would not directly intervene and fight the Ukrainian war for them. So, the people who have the biggest nuclear bombs are the most powerful, or are most willing to use them, win.
But in fact, Canada and the U.S. and others, and the U.K. and Germany and so on, have been arming the Ukrainians successfully, and that will continue. The notion that is not happening because Russia has nuclear weapons, it's not real. And Ukraine, I wouldn't say they're winning the war, but they're certainly doing very well. And that's got to be a disincentive. I mean, not just to the Russians, but also to the Chinese, who will come to realize that this is the kind of problem they're going to face if they go into Taiwan. And Russia has become an international pariah, which again is a message that the Chinese are bound to pick up, because they don't want to become an international pariah.
Look, I'm a peace activist. Normally, I don't go around cheering for the military. I don't say, good for you, I'm glad you're in there handling it for me. But what you're saying is we have to depend on the military to win for us, which is not answering any of our problems. What we want is a world order. We want a world law. We want to have government that is actually legal. And we have to have a system of justice and things, and where we don't depend on armed force as a way of keeping people decent and preventing people from doing war crimes. I want to see something that will enable somebody or some group of people in Russia to say, well, we have every indication legally that the world consider this man a war criminal, and that we have an obligation, not just a right, but a duty to stop him.
Well, fair enough, but to use the law, you have to stick to the law. The notion of encouraging a coup is not a legal recourse.
It would be if it's authorized, if the real leader is not legal, and you say that's he's not legal, then who is? Find somebody who would be. The people of Russia have to be empowered enough to take responsibility for their own government.
I mean, the Ukrainian defense against the Russian invasion is legal, no question about it. But it still only matters if it works. And the same with the coup. I mean, the coup may be legal, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean anything.
Right, might makes right. That's what you're saying. Might makes right. If whoever wins, that's good. We hope that the right side wins.
That's not right.
That's not good enough.
Fair enough, but if you want to function on the law, you have to stick to the law. You can't. And the reality is, even in the you say if there's a burglar, he gets prosecuted, but that's not the case in every case. Some of them get away, some of them escape, some of them are never found. Even our domestic law is not 100% perfect. And you can't say, well, because the law isn't 100% perfect, we have to try something else.
No, what we say is the police can go and arrest this guy while he's in the act. Right now, we have no way of saying anybody can go and arrest this war criminal while he's in the act. You have to wait until he's finished the job and then put him on trial, maybe, if enough countries think that it's a cute idea.
No, I wouldn't say that that's the case. You can, I mean, legally, if somebody tried to arrest Putin now for war crime or crimes against humanity, they'd have the authority to do so. The problem is the practicality, not the legality.
Mm-hmm. Well, a coup is the only way I know, unless you want to have police. If you want to have world police force be able to go in and arrest people from now on, do you want to change the international law so that we have an armed force that's going to govern the whole world? I don't. I want to have at least the responsibility for the people who elected a guy to get rid of him, and a duty to do so.
Yeah, but I frankly, I don't see how you can argue both for and against armed force. I mean, in terms of law, you apply the law, you set up the law, you work the mechanisms to make them work as best you can. The issue of armed forces, whether it practically happens, but it's not. I mean, it's sure the police have to arrest a criminal, and I don't think we should have an international police force. I don't think we should be encouraging coups either.
Well, then what do you want to do? Let the guy stay in office because we don't have any other mechanism? That's the problem. We have to think up a new solution because this is bad. We can't let this continue where people who are, heads of government are dictators that want to rule the world and they kill everybody in sight. We can't allow that. We have to change the rules.
But as I say, you're not going to catch every criminal, domestic or international.
True.
You set up the law and you work the law and try to make it work as best you can. It's not going to be 100%.
Can be a lot better than it is now. I don't like what's arranging now, where they can get away with whatever they do until nobody can stop this man. Everybody that I interview who's Russian, I say, who in Russia could possibly stop Putin? If he even wanted to use a nuclear weapon, who could stop him? And I just talked to Michael McFaul, and he said, nobody. Nobody could stop him.
We can do better than we're doing now. My suggestion of the way to do better than we are now is for Canada to sign the Rome Treaty on aggression, to enact legislation on aggression, to prosecute Putin for aggression, and other states should do the same with universal jurisdiction. That's what we can do better.
I'm in favor of that, but it doesn't rule out what I'm saying. I would agree with you. Do what you can do now, but then, a couple of years from now, we're going to have a big international conference and say, look, the laws have not been working. We've got somebody's actually violated them and gotten away with it, and that's not tolerable. We have to change the system because global governance is not functioning, and we have to have a real rule of law. So let's change the law afterward. I'm not saying don't do what you're doing. I'm 1,000% in favor of what you want to do.
But, what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union? There was more than one cause, but I think a major cause was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which was devastating for the Soviet Union and led to a lot of hostility to the Soviet Union. And that same dynamic is eventually going to work in Russia. Russia itself is an empire, controlling many of its components by force. And Russia itself could collapse because of never mind Putin being arrested, but the whole Russian Federation could collapse because of the invasion of Ukraine, because there are tens of thousands of Russians being killed needlessly, and they don't even understand why. And that's going to come back to bite the Russian government.
Yeah, a lot of bad things could happen. I don't know. The U.S. might have a civil war. I think that's about as likely, if not more likely, than the Russia collapsing because of Ukraine. Anyway, I've been hogging the mic. David, you must have thoughts. I hope.
I go back to the business about pairs. We talk about winning and losing, and I'm doing a series of articles on winning, losing, fearing, needing vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. And one of those articles is being published in the World Academy now. The incrementalism about winning and losing. If somebody's doing something bad, one of the actions to be taken is to make the cost of doing something bad so expensive, he or she decides, well, maybe this isn't worth continuing. So that's one issue. Two, the nuclear weapon threat by Russia, which has not been activated, has something to do with the incredible march of technology and new weapons. Another pair, incentivization, disincentivization. We right now have very little process that de-incentivizes autocracy. In fact, if you read Freedom House's reports as democracy does this and autocracy is doing this, there's no new disincentives for that trend to continue. How do we incentivize democracy, accountability? I don't even think we talked about this. And I've got some of this in the article that I'm preparing. David, you said you can change the institutions, but you can't change the planet. I agree 100%. And what's in the planet is partially history. The minute there's a bunch of new laws that, how will I say this, disadvantage some parties or people, they're going to come up with arguments pointing out that the people that are on their back have some terrible history about treatment of peoples, like Canada, like the United States, like Venezuela. There's history will not go away. It's being changed all the time, of course, and added to and voted out and rewritten and things, but it will not go away. And it will always be an argument for people who are going to lose because of some major change to argue with. And lastly, the international police force. In effect, Russia has an international police force. It's active in several countries, the Wagner Group. And I'm not too sure who's in charge of that and what effect it is having on the ability of international organizations to react. I know it's in Ukraine. I know it's all throughout the Sahel. The French have just left Barkhane in parts of the Sahel, and the Wagner Group is there big time. The Russian Foreign Legion, it can be called. So there's a bunch.
Interesting.
There are a bunch of barriers to moving too quickly. So I, along with David, the incrementalism probably is the only way. Might not be a very good way, might not get us where we want to go nearly as fast as we would like to go, but we've got to take one step at a time and dealing with these countervailing obstacles. I mean, we all said that Russia was going to lose. Russia's bank account is fatter than it's been for a long time. Nobody sort of put that in their little analysis docket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People said Russia is such a mean-spirited, cruel, aggressive person. Everybody's going to disagree with what they've done in Ukraine. I haven't seen any shift at all in the list of countries that have supported it or haven't supported it about the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So these are the realities. And part of that, of course, is history.
Let's get back to what we want, because we have about 2 minutes in which to decide what is the most, well, I think two things. One is what is likely, what is possible. I think David's proposal is possible. I think my proposal is not possible now, but I think it will be. And I think you have to think about it beforehand, because when it becomes possible 4 or 5 years from now, we better have a plan in place. Question is, if you had a chance to make this into a rule, what I'm proposing, would you go for it?
Well, I think what you're proposing, I'd have to really look at in writing, because I had just heard about it now when you mentioned it. I think it's worthwhile considering how we could design the institutions we have now. And I take your point that, well, obviously, the world order, I mean, the UN basically was set up after World War II, and the system, and we're in a very different world now than the world that existed after World War II. And I think the institutions should be changed to reflect that. So I think it's worthwhile considering that. But I think we have to keep in mind, I mean, the limitations of the reality we face when we design these new institutions, and we can't just, on the basis of generalities that are embedded in these institutions, hope that things will work for the better, because often they don't, and we see people with narrow interests pervert general statements to work to their own advantage. So I think we have to keep in mind not just what the world should be, but and aim for a better world, but also put in place preventive mechanisms so things don't get worse than they are now.
Okay, I won't even quibble with you. I think, yeah, give it a second thought, at least a second, maybe third or fourth or fifth thought, and don't do anything rash, and just start thinking about it. That's good enough for me. I think that, but yeah, I think your proposal is the one to go with right now, and I would really love to back that. So let's see if we can figure out whom to contact who might have some persuasive power in Ottawa. Okay, David he's close to Ottawa. You can run up to Ottawa for the weekend and talk to Justin for us. Okay,
I'm not allowed on Wellington Street. No, I mean, as you both know, I practice foresight, strategic foresight. And sooner or later, there will be an election in Canada. And right now, it looks like the new Conservative leader will be Mr. Poilievre. And honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen anything about him geopolitics. And maybe somebody who's connected to the Conservative Party might want to see if they can sit down with him and ask him what he thinks.
Okay. I don't know anybody who can do that, but let's be on the lookout. Our time is up. We've run over. Okay. This has been fun. I hope it would actually have some impact in some way or another. Who knows? Thank you both. Appreciate it. Okay. Bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode 492. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. We even post transcripts there. And when you get to that website, look around. We have information there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through Pressreader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.